Hello guys, welcome to this YouTube channel. If you've not subscribed, you can subscribe. Today we are looking at writing tests in Django, and writing tests refers to the creation of automated tests to ensure the correctness and functionality of your application views, model, forms, and other components. It therefore means that writing a test is an essential part of software development process as it helps in identifying and preventing bugs or issues in your code. Now, Django as a framework provides a test framework that makes it relatively easier to write and run tests. The framework includes various tools and utilities to simulate user interactions, check expected behaviors, and validate the output of your application. The primary module that is always being used in Django tests is in testing of Django codes is the Django test as provided here. So this file here is found basically when you have started your application. This is an application that I have been working on, especially in the previous videos. When you look at my previous videos on Django forms, Django models, Django templating, this is the application that we created about meal recipes last time. So whenever you've created an application, you will always find that you have this tests file here where you can be able to write your tests. Tests are just but codes are written to test another code, as we are going to see. So basically, to write tests in Django, you typically create a separate module or package within the Django project specifically for tests, and that is the way our file come into play. In this module, you define test cases by subclassing the Django test case. So that one we are going to see how it happens. So basically, to write a successful Django test, there are several key concepts and techniques that you as a software developer or a software engineer or upcoming software engineer, you are supposed to get into contact or be familiar with, especially when you are working with the Django framework. And some of them are using test cases and test methods, where in Django tests are organized into test cases, which are classes that inherit from the Django test case that has been imported, especially in this file here. The next one is another concept is about testing clients, where Django provides testing clients such as self.client that allows you to simulate HTTP requests and interact with your views. This allows you to use methods such as get, post, put, and delete, especially when you are doing API testings. Then we have other things to do with the URLs and the URL reversed, which often requires accessing to Django URLs, Django reverse function that helps you to retrieve the URL patterns for a given view, allowing you to create URL dynamic without hard coding them. Then in Python test, there is the assertion. And assertions basically are fundamentals for writing tests, especially in the Django framework. When you are working with Django framework, you want to write tests framework that provide a range of assertions. This includes assert equal, assert true, assert contain, that you can use to validate the expected behavior or compare values when you are working with the Python framework. The other concept that you are supposed to be familiar with as a software engineer is text fixtures and data, where tests sometimes require test data to set up an initial conditions or simulate specific scenarios. Django provides this mechanism like fixtures, which are predefined data sets, and you can create data. Test data programmatically using test-specific models or utility methods. The other concept you are supposed to be familiar with is about the coverage and isolation. Basically, when you are doing tests, your aim is to achieve good test coverage by ensuring that your test exercise as much as as much of your code base as possible. Isolate your test from external dependencies such as databases or third-party services by using techniques like mocking or using test specific settings. The other thing is about testing models and forms. In addition to testing views, where we are looking at the views functions, you can be able to at least do the testing for models and forms. As per now, here I have these two models from my previous video where we are going to write tests for these two classes that we have here. The other thing is about running tests. Running tests is just about doing the Python. If I expand the terminal here, and I do an ls, we have the Python manage.py that enables us to be able to run tests. So when I do manage.py then tests, you can see that this as per now is running and saying that we don't have any test here. So that is a way of running all the tests that you are writing on the test files. Another concept that you are supposed to be familiar with as a software engineer is the continuous integration, where you integrate your tests with applications such as Jenkins, Travis CI, and GitHub Actions to automate tests whenever changes are pushed to your repository. Now, continuous integration ensures that your tests are executed consistently and helps in maintaining the code quality. So basically, there are several reasons why people write tests. One is to identify and prevent bugs. You want to prevent bugs in your application. You want to enhance code confidence and quality whenever you are doing your testing. You want to enhance maintainability and refactoring of the test, where the tests allow you to modify or optimize your code with confidence, because you can rerun tests and verify that the desired behavior remains into contact. Another thing is about enhancing collaborations and teamwork whenever you are doing tests. There is another reason is about continuous integration and deployments, where by integrating tests into your continuous integration, you can automatically run them whenever changes are made. To your code base. This ensures that issues are caught earlier, especially bugs that may occur into your program are caught earlier, preventing the deployment of fault codes to the production environment. The other thing is about regression prevention, where you make changes to your application, either by adding new features or fixing bugs, testing to ensure that the existing functionality remains intact. Running tests before deploying codes helps you in identifying regressions, ensuring the previous codes are working correctly within your application. Another thing is about when you want to write tests is about improving code design and architecture, where writing tests often encourages better code design and architecture, where from this point here, testable codes tends to be more modular, loosely coupled, and adhere to good software engineering principles. By considering testability during development, you can create code that is easier to understand, maintain, and extend. The other thing is provision of documentation and example. Tests therefore serve as a living documentation and examples on how to use your code. When written clearly, when you write these tests clearly and descriptively, tests therefore provides insights into how different parts of your application should be used and what results to expect. They can act as a reference point for other developers interacting with your code. So let's say, for example, I have this application here where it was just about a recipe application, where people do an input, it displays output for the users. If I run this application, if I run this application and pick this, you find that this was the application from the previous video. So basically it was displaying this from the first model, which was enabling me to be able to at least publish the recipes that are have been submitted, or the ones that have been created. The other code, which is about submission of recipe, was to enable users to be able to at least give recipes that they might be having and want to be published within the application. So we have those two classes in these models. I'm just going to do a simple tests, write simple test for these two models. So first of all, what you want to do is to ensure that inside these models we import the models that we want to test. So inside the test file, we are going to do from .models. From .models, we are importing meal recipe, and we are importing submit recipe. So these are the two classes that we have here that we want to test. Now I talked about subclassing of the different Django models. So for now I'm writing test on models. So we can have, for example, the first class is about meal recipe, maybe test case, and inside this test case we are going to have the parameter test case. So first of all, we want to do like a setup, and this setup, what is supposed to help us with is to enable us to be able to at least create two instances of a meal recipe model within the specific attributes. Like you imagine like whatever kind of information that is supposed to be submitted or displayed within this model. So I'm going to do define a function, and this function is going to be a setup. So inside this setup, we are going to have a meal recipe dot objects dot create So inside here I'm going to have like two meal recipe objects. Let's say, for example, I have these two. So I've set up the two meal recipe objects where I have the title, the requirements, and the procedure of whatever is supposed to happen. That is basically the three requirements that are available in our code here. We have the title, the requirements, and the procedure on what is supposed to be taken in the meal recipe. Basically, when you are doing tests, sometimes it is always do an assumption that you are the user of that application, and therefore you are writing code to test how it will operate, especially when the users are interacting with it. So here once I've done that setup, I'm now going to write the first function test that is going to at least test the string method of the meal recipe model and returns the different representation of the object. So here I'm going to have define test meal recipe, and what we want to test is the string function. That string function takes in self Then from here I'm going to take, for example, in our function, in our setup here we have created like spaghetti. So let me start with spaghetti here, whether our function is going to run to bring in the spaghetti. Then inside spaghetti is equals to meal recipe. Inside the meal recipe we have meal recipe dot objects dot create dot title, and that title is equals to spaghetti. So we are testing whether the title here is behaving correctly. Remember, the spaghetti is whatever we have placed at this point here. Whether the string method is going to give us spaghetti. Let's take another one, like the other one is about the title, which is on salad. So I'm going to pick the salad. Salad is equals to meal recipe, and then here it is salad. So that is another object. Here we are not creating, we are trying to get the object. Then from here what we do is that we are going to do an assertion. So this assert, we are going to look at the equal using the assert equal function. So when you have defined a function like this, so we are going to do self dot assert self dot assert equal. So we are going to do self dot assert equal going to look at if the string method here on spaghetti is giving us the spaghetti that is supposed to be the equal function here within whatever we have set up in our test case. So when I run, for example, now this test here, like in this our terminal, find that we have one error, which is we didn't put here as self. So when I run the test again, you find that one test has been found and it has gone correctly. So for us to be able to see more about this test, the way it has been done, we can create and have the verbose function, include the verbose, and here I'm going to include the verbose to be 2. So here tells you that now it gives you information that the test meal recipe is okay. So from here now we can then look at the uniqueness, where we are raising an exception. For example, if an exception error if the meal that we are submitting has been submitted twice or thrice. Basically we are going to define define test test mail recipe, and here we are still testing the title, and we are looking at how unique the title is, the uniqueness. The uniqueness of the title, and here we're also picking self. So we want to look at how unique the title is supposed to be, and here we are going to use the with so that at least we can do our test correctly. So we have with self raise an exception, especially when you are looking at the title of this object that we have created, and ensuring that the title is not duplicated within our program. So when I run the test again, you find that the system has identified our tests, and here the third test is okay. So basically this is now like I'm writing a code to test another code that is already existing here. The other thing is about let's now move to, maybe you want to write codes that test the submission from the users, and when you want to test the submission from the users, this is taking requirements like title requirements and the procedures. So I'm going to define another class, maybe, and this class this time I'm going to call it submit recipe, test, and inside here we are just going to pick test case. Submit a recipe test case. So here now we are going to also define a setup function, and inside this setup we are going to create a recipe that is picking in maybe for example the title, for example test recipe, the requirements ingredient 1, ingredient 2, and the procedure step 1 do this, step 2 do that, you see. So you are imagining like you are a user of this application for you to write a test very much clearly. So the first test we want to do from our setup here is to test the string representation. So I'm going to define test string representation, and here what we are going to do is just looking at whether the test that we are doing is equals to the string representation of our setup is giving us the correct thing. So we have here like a recipe that we had defined in our setup, and this recipe is what we are looking at, the representation in terms of what we are supposed to return as a string here. Remember, when we write our functions or our classes, we had a function here that is supposed to return the string representation of whatever we have. So inside this, when I run, for example, now the test, okay, here is where I have a problem. Okay, good. Now you see that When I run the representation, the system has detected found 3 tests, and the 3 tests are this one that are represented here. So the system in one way or the other is able to at least look for whatever I want within this application. So the other thing is, for example, when you want to test, you want to test for you want to write a test that ensures that when creating a submit recipe object within a field, ensure that the fields are blank at any given time a user is doing a submission. So you are going to define test for blank fields, test blank fields, test blank fields, and here is going to pick up self. Then inside self here, we can pick in the recipe, because we had created a recipe. We had created a recipe here for our setup, and ensure that anytime the user is doing an insert to this information that is available here, the title and the requirements and the procedure are always blank, so that they can be able to submit their information clearly. So inside this test, when I run the test again, you find that testing the string representation, testing the blank field has been done correctly. The other thing you might want to test, because here we have a maximum number of length is equals to 500. The maximum number of length of the title is 100. You might want to also test the maximum lengths within these parameters. So you decide, you define test maximum length, and this is also picking self, and inside maximum length, let's say for example you have a recipe object and the title of the requirement, and making sure that you have the recipe here, and this object has a title. For example, if I take letter A and multiply by 100 and take letter B and multiply by 500, I will do an assert that the length of the title is equals to 100, and the other assertion is that the length of the requirement is equals to 500. So I'm just doing multiplication from the input, and when I run the test, you find that the maximum length string representation has passed correctly within the test that I'm doing. The other thing that you want to test is whether new recipe can be added, and that each and every field is given the expected value. So you are going to write like define the test for adding, because we are telling the users to be able to submit. So we add the recipe, which is equals to self. So here you will have maybe, for example, a recipe that has the title like the way we had written here, a recipe that has a title. The title may be, for example, new recipe, the ingredient 1, ingredient 2, procedure, do this, do that, and that is what you are asserting here. You are asserting that the values that are being submitted here in our submit model is the correct values within this test. So when I run, for example, now the test, you find that the test to add recipe here has passed correctly. So these are just but an example of the different tests that you can write on from the models that you have within the Django framework. You can also decide that you want to test Django forms, like for example, when I go here, I have a form here that is used in submitting recipe. Now you want to test the behavior of this form here. So what happens? For example, I decide that we decide that from our forms here, we decide that we want to write a test that is being used in ensuring that we are able to at least submit the forms correctly, the behavior of the form. So I'll have a class, and this class is going to be submit recipe form test. And here maybe we decide we now want to do, maybe for example, with other understanding of tests, we can decide that we want to do unit test for the test cases. So inside here, once you have written that, you are going to test the validity of the form. And for example, now we are going to define a function, and this function is going to be testing the valid data within the form submission. So you want to test the validity of the data that is being submitted by the users within your form. So here we are going to have, like, we have form data, and we have those different information that is being submitted by the user. So like form information here, like you can see they look like the JSON string, like more or less like the dictionary. Like for example, a user submits a title, cheesecake, the requirement, cream cheese, eggs, sugar, procedure, mix everything together, bake for 1 hour. So you want to test this kind of information, and then from here you take that form is equals to, we define a function called form is equals to submit recipe form, where data is equals to form data. So we are asserting whether the validity of the form is taking in everything correctly. Remember, we have not imported the form, so it is always good to always import form. So we are going to import it from recipe, app dot forms import submit recipe form. Yes, import submit recipe form. So you make sure that you have that, so that at least when you are doing the submission of data, it tests this data that is supposed to be here. More on whatever you can also test is ensuring that you test the length requirement. You can test the procedure. You can test the title based on these conditionals that have been placed here. So once you have done that, you can be able to at least run this. It is always to include this function in Python, so that it makes sure that it runs these tests only, the one that we have. And then it does the unit test main. So from here now you can decide that you want to run these tests. So something is not done correctly. Name undefined. So we have not imported the unit test. We need to import it. Import unit test. So we have the unit test also imported. So when I run the framework, you find that everything runs correctly, even the test valid data. The test valid data is the representation here. So basically you can have very many things that you can decide to test on your code, so that at least you can see when you are in a Django framework, you can decide that you want to also test the views function. You have the views functions here, submission, how the rendering is taking place when you are looking at the get, the post framework, so that you look at this representation, the behavior of your application when you submit it to different data. Otherwise, thank you, and that is more that is Django writing tests of models and forms, and you can then proceed to writing tests on views on your code. So basically tests is just writing a code to test a code that you have written, and this one you are now supposed to at least understand the behavior of your application to be able to do it successfully. Otherwise, thank you.